what did you do next in order to drum up, I guess, interest in your now productized accounting service?
So at the time, we still didn't have a big network. I'd only been living on the Gold Coast for maybe 3 years, and I hadn't put a lot of time into building a network. We didn't have an email list, and we weren't really known in any industry. So it was friends and family to start with, just getting in touch with everyone that we knew. This was both me and my co-founder, and just letting people know what we were up to. We were trying to tell a story from day one. So our original story was that we launched this business in 7 days last week, and this is what we're up to. And so that some people found that quite interesting, especially if they had read the 7 Day Startup. And so having a story to tell in those early days enabled us to have more conversations because people were interested in listening and also wanted to help us.
Welcome back to the Teach Traffic podcast with myself, Ilana Wexler. This is a show where we reveal the best tips, tricks and tactics to increasing your website traffic and then converting that traffic into leads and sales. We also discuss what's working right now in the ever-changing world of web marketing so you can apply it to your business. Welcome back to episode 55 of the Teach Traffic podcast. I'm your host, Ilana Wexler, and today we've got a really interesting guest and story that I want to share with you today. I'm interviewing a lady called Meryl Johnston, and Meryl is an interesting person because back in 2015, she launched her business called Bean Ninjas with $1,000 and a dream of launching and changing the bookkeeping industry. So she has grown her business called, as I said, Bean Ninjas from her kitchen table to being a multinational and award-winning business that it is today. But also, interestingly, she launched it in 7 days. She followed Dan Norris's 7-day startup method, and it was really off the back of Dan Norris's book as well as his journey that she launched this Bean Ninjas business in 7 days and has grown it to, as I said, what it is today, which is an amazing testament. So I thought it would be interesting to chat with Meryl today about the way that she grew her business, how she got early momentum, and then once sort of that low-hanging fruit was captured, how she grew it beyond that, which is obviously a completely different skill set entirely. So let's get stuck in today's episode. For information on today's episode, you can visit teachtraffic.com, where we will provide some show notes and resources on today's episode, so you don't have to write any notes. We'll do all that hard work for you. So let's get stuck in today's episode. Welcome to today's show, Meryl.
Thanks, Alana. It's great to be here.
Awesome. It's awesome to have you here. So before we kind of get stuck into how you stumbled on your new business idea and grew it to the level that it is today, which is a very decent business, do you mind giving us a quick 5 seconds about who you are and what your business does?
Sure. So my background was accounting. So when I was at university, I wanted to run businesses, and I thought that learning about accounting was a great way to get exposure to different businesses. And so that's why I started. And actually, it took me 10 years to get out of the corporate accounting roles. So that was
a relate. I spent 10 years in corporate too.
It was a really good grounding. I learned some great skills. And as an accountant, you get exposure to all kinds of different businesses, and you get to see the mechanics of how they run and the numbers, and also have conversations with business owners. So it was a really good grounding, but I always knew from early on that I wanted to own and run businesses. And Bean Ninjas wasn't my first business. I had a tennis coaching business back when I was at uni, and my transition from corporate out of corporate was consulting. And I did that for about 9 months before I realized it wasn't the business model for me, and it was quite hard to scale. And there's some other frustrations with that business model. And Bean Ninjas, which is more in the vein of a productized service type business model, was my solution to address the problems that I saw with the consulting business model. And so Bean Ninjas started back in 2015. So we're about 4 years old now. We started as a fixed fee bookkeeping service, specializing in Xero software. And now we do bookkeeping, but also financial reporting. And there's an education arm to the business too. So we've evolved as the business has grown.
Yeah, interesting. And you've got an interesting story about how you started that business. Do you want to sort of touch on how you stumbled on this idea?
Yeah. So I'd been working in a co-working space with a guy called Dan Norris on the Gold Coast. And I didn't know much about what he did, but it turned out he ran a business called WP Curve, which was a productized service related to WordPress. And he'd also written a book called The 7-Day Startup. And he'd kind of been pushing me a little bit to get out of consulting and maybe do the WP Curve for accounting. So having read his book and then also feeling some of these frustrations with consulting and doing custom work and just cash flow challenges and difficulty building a team, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to launch in 7 days following the methodology in that book. And my co-founder, Ben McAdam, had also read the book. And so he flew to the Gold Coast. And in that week, we just created our own logo. We built a website in WordPress. We did our best guess at what some fixed fee bookkeeping packages should look like. And we found our first customer, who is actually still a customer today.
Wow, that's awesome.
We've just evolved from there. So we each put in $500. And so growth in the early days was slow because we had to earn every dollar before we could spend it. And we were doing this as a side hustle, really. We had other businesses we were running. So early growth was slow. And then we realized, hang on, this business model has legs. And that's when we really made a concerted effort to be able to transition into being ninjas full time.
Yeah, right. So I'm just curious, how did you get your first customer?
We posted in Dan's Facebook group.
Oh, nice.
And it was a guy called Jared Robinson, who you probably know of as well.
And
he was in that group and said, sure, I need help with bookkeeping. And he was our first customer.
There you go. I love stories like this. It's sort of, it's the kind of thing that I think that, you start and where you end up 4 years later, because I'm sure where you are now looks vastly different, or maybe not vastly different, but somewhat different to where you started. But had you not started, you wouldn't have ended up where you are now. So it's such a chicken and egg thing, I guess.
It is, and I'm such a big believer in speed of execution, and that's something that we did when we started the business. But the whole way through, as an accountant, we're trained to analyze and think about things, and I do like to analyze and think to a degree, but I think it's really important to act quickly and then just test and iterate. And so that's something that we've tried from day one to really have as part of our culture as the business, which can be difficult in the industry that we're in financial services.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I guess that's how I've pretty much run my business to date, is to try something. Right, does it work? Okay, great. How can we pivot and iterate? Or does this have legs? No, okay, then we just kill it, Anyway, let's not digress. So you've created your business in 7 days. What did you do next in order to drum up, I guess, interest in your now productized accounting service?
So at the time, we still didn't have a big network. I'd only been living on the Gold Coast for maybe 3 years, and I hadn't put a lot of time into building a network. We didn't have an email list, and we weren't really known in any industry. So it was friends and family to start with, just getting in touch with everyone that we knew. This was both me and my co-founder, and just letting people know what we were up to. We were trying to tell a story from day one. So our original story was that we launched this business in 7 days last week, and this is what we're up to. And so that some people found that quite interesting, especially if they had read the 7 Day Startup. And so having a story to tell in those early days enabled us to have more conversations because people were interested in listening and also wanted to help us. So I'd say for the first 6 months, it was all relationships, friends, family, friends of friends that became customers. But at that, we wrote our first blog post in that first week too. And so we were already starting to slowly build an email list and starting to create content. But it took a lot longer for that to actually turn into customers. It was all direct relationships in the early days.
Yeah. I can imagine, like you quickly generate those initial customers through your relationships and referrals, but then you exhaust through that, and then what? So you mentioned that you wrote your first blog post. as a content marketing strategy, how often would you write content, and then what would you do with that content once you wrote it? Would you syndicate it out?
Yeah, so we've gone through different phases in the business in terms of how frequently we produce content. So I think we're in the first year we were trying to write content every second week, and then we've been through phases where we publish weekly, and at the moment we're publishing blog posts less than that. But we were trying to get into have a consistent routine around it, so our audience knew what to expect and when they could expect it. And in terms of promotion, we were building an email list. We were also sharing on social media. And back then, you could post on Facebook and get some organic reach without having to pay for it. And so we would share our content in groups where it was relevant. We weren't just blasting out everywhere, but if someone asked a question and we had a piece of content that answered that question, or it was a topic that we thought that group was interested in, then we were also sharing our content in different groups that we were really active and trying to be great participants in, and givers, not just blasting out our stuff.
Did you find that people were taking action, like moving to the next step as a result of your content? Like, was your content doing the heavy lifting in terms of making people take some kind of action to take the next step?
Not in the early days. I'd say it's only now, so we're 4 years or 4.5 years into the business, that our content's starting to pay off. So it led to other opportunities though. So if you'd asked me in year one of the business, did all of the effort that we put into content result in a direct customer? So someone read our content and then bought? I would say no. But I think that's partly the sales cycle, in that when you're selling bookkeeping services, someone needs to have a high level of trust before they're going to give you access to their finances and their bank account details and things like that. So I think it's partly the industry, but also we weren't that great at writing content in the beginning, and we didn't really have a clear strategy. There was a lot that we needed to learn about it. But even in the early days, so I think within 9 months of writing regular content, I was starting to get asked to speak at events. And I spoke at XeroCon when Big Ninjas was a pretty small business, and XeroCon's a conference that has about 3,500 people. And so it wasn't directly leading to sales, but it was gradually helping us to kind of move up that credibility ladder, even if it wasn't in front of customers, but it was in front of the industry. But I think step by step, as you create content, you build influence, and also you refine your message and also figure out who your audience is, you might not get results immediately, and we definitely didn't, but I'm really glad that we persisted, because now, 4.5 years later, we are seeing good results.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned that your content is different now based on what you've learned, and you've got more of a content strategy. Do you mind sort of touching on how is it different, and what have you done? What do you do differently now with your content that you were not doing in the beginning?
In the beginning, I just wrote about whatever popped into my head and whatever I felt like writing about. And sometimes our audience might be interested in that, but I wasn't writing with the audience in mind. I was writing with me in mind and what I wanted to say. And I think now a more effective strategy, which we're using now, is to think about who our audience is and who we want our audience to be, and then what kind of content would actually be useful for them, or what would be interesting. And we also broke our content into some different categories. So we're an accounting business, so we write some content related to that, and we might write about Xero features or how you solve a particular accounting problem. But then we're working with small businesses, so we also have content that's related to building culture in remote teams, scaling businesses, systems and processes. And so basically we looked at, well, what are the broad range of topics that our audience are interested in? Let's pick some categories, and then let's be more intentional about how much we're writing about in these different categories and when we're going to be producing the content. As an example, in March of this year, we launched a financial literacy course. And so we looked at what's the pain point or the multiple pain points that we're solving with this course. And then we started to create content that addressed or even raised some of these issues. And so that was a lot more strategic approach than the early days of just writing what I felt like.
Mm. And did you include certain components or elements to the content, or is it just purely a text-based thing? Like, did you have a call to action at the end, or some kind of something that people opt in to?
We haven't opted. So we've been through phases where sometimes we've tried to have a, a unique opt-in that relates to each piece of content. But we found, and I can see merit to that, but it was just too time consuming. And within our budget constraints, I'd prefer to spend that time on something else. So we actually don't do that anymore, even though if we had more resources, we probably would. And instead we decided on making one awesome opt-in. And so we do have a couple of opt-ins that we're using, but there's one that performs particularly well, and we just put a ton of value into that. So it's got things like a cash flow forecast template that I created. It's got a huge checklist of things to check in Xero, and there's a bookkeeping timetable that I created as well. And so if someone opts in, they get all of those things, and they're really useful resources. So we actually just decided to focus on that, and then most of the posts will have a call to action, or they'll have that opt-in. But then depending on the post, so some of the posts that relate to the financial literacy course, then the call to action might be to join our 5-day challenge, our free 5-day challenge that leads into the course. And if I move to our podcast for a moment, we don't have advertisers on our podcast, but we advertise Bean Ninjas on the podcast. So we have call to actions that relate. I've recorded a number of different call to actions, and depending on the episode, then we insert one of those call to actions.
Yeah, interesting. Do you find that there's certain call to actions, or like, do lots of people register for the challenge more versus other things, or is it sort of contingent on what is that leading piece of content?
I think it comes back to why is someone reading that content, and so there might be multiple reasons. They may have come across it, maybe they saw it in the email list, and so I think the person who's reading it, their behaviour will change depending on what they were trying to achieve. So if someone was searching for a particular solution to how to connect Stripe and Xero, and then they read our post about it, and then there's an opt-in that relates to that, then I think the success rate is higher than if they just read a general business post and then the opt-ins related to Xero tips, because they might actually not be interested in that opt-in as much. With the challenge, it's only early days, so we've only run the challenge once, and so we've only been testing those call to actions over a short period of time. So I don't have enough data on that yet, but that's something that we are really data driven with everything. So I'm interested to dig into that. We're actually running the challenge again at the beginning of October, and so I'm really interested to see if we can tweak what we did and if our results are going to change.
Yeah, interesting. I know content marketing is a long game, and it's a long-term play, and often it takes a little while to get results. So what are some of the other methods that you used to get traction in the early days?
I had a podcast outreach strategy. So we didn't have a podcast. Our podcast has been going for a bit over a year, but back then we didn't have a podcast, but I had a strategy where I was a nobody, no one had heard of me. So I had to work really hard to get my first 5 podcast interviews. So being interviewed on other podcasts back in 2015. And so that was part of our strategy. I think I was on 15 podcasts in a period of something like 6 months. And that was hard work because I really had to try and explain why these guests should host me. And that really helped again, it wasn't a direct sale, but just people being more aware of the Bean Ninjas brand and our story. And maybe they read a piece of our content and they heard that podcast, and then they heard another podcast, and then they thought, oh, maybe I should call Bean Ninjas.
Mm. There's so many touch points in there. It's sort of really hard. And this is what I find happens a lot with business owners is they're so attribution focused. Like, is this one specific channel working for me? If it's not, I'm going to cut it off. When really there's so many touch points that are all leading up to that final sale, and who really gets the credit for it? Well, they all do, don't you think?
They do. And that's something I've struggled with, especially around content, because the payoff period is so long, and often it's hard to collect data on that.
Yeah.
But I've really believed in it as a strategy. And I used to cop a little bit of criticism in some of the mastermind groups that I've been in about why am I putting resources into this when I could be focused on more direct sales strategies that might result in a sale today. Yeah. But I feel like by building a brand and building assets, starting to rank for keywords and building awareness of who I am, who other key people in the business are, it's a longer term strategy, but I think we're building more of an asset than if we just tried a quick short term sales strategy.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think podcasting is such an amazing medium for sharing content and building a relationship with your audience that in my experience, like, so obviously I've got my own podcast, we're talking on it now, but I also go on other people's podcasts, and it's incredibly, what's the word? It's quite sticky. Like, it lasts a lot longer in terms of the effect of it and the content. People consume content at different times, so contrast that to speaking at an event, which I kind of say is like a bit of a sugar high. You get a huge influx of leads, but then the event is over, and then the sugar rush is over. Versus a podcast, which is much more consistent, and as you say, it's a real asset.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And when you were talking about events, that actually reminded me of two of our other really early strategies that we don't focus on as much now. Mm-hmm. So one was referral partners. So I spent a lot of time building relationships with accounting firms, because we don't do tax. We do GST, but not income tax. And so we could refer a lot of work to accountants. But that strategy didn't work very well for us, because they retained their really good bookkeeping clients, but didn't referred the more difficult ones to us.
Right.
But we in the early days, we did get some clients out of that. And I was part of BNI for a little while, which some of your audience may be familiar with, which gets you to think about how can you help other people and refer them work and build relationships with people, again, that have access to a group or an audience of your target market. So we did that in the early days, but I don't spend as much time on that anymore. And then with events, I actually spent a lot of time going to events, to not speaking in the early days so much, but more just building relationships.
Yeah, look, I could relate to that too. When I started out with my agency, 7 odd years ago, I used to do a lot of business networking breakfast. I didn't do BNI, but I know what BNI is. And it was a great way to build a referral base, at least. Like, I never did web design, for example, so it was a great way for me to meet a web designer that I could refer them work, and then they might possibly refer me work. So business networking, I can relate, is definitely where I cut my teeth, sort of growing my business. Alrighty, so content, referral networks, all that kind of, I guess, slow burning type strategies. What are some of the other methods that you used once you had a few clients under your belt and you to really kind of ramp up the acceleration?
So we tried Facebook ads probably in about at the 18-month mark. We ran ads to a free zero audit. And we thought it was a pretty good offer. We'd had it convert at an event before, and it converted well. And it didn't convert well. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. Lots of people signed up for it, but then no one would give us their zero file access in order for us to do the audit, because they thought we might be a scam. And so it went well.
I can understand that.
Yeah. So that was our first attempt at Facebook ads, and it didn't really result in sales. Then we ran Facebook ads to a job ad with a picture of me, the typical digital nomad picture with me with a laptop at a beach. Or it was me working at one of our clients, which is a surf resort. And it was funny, that did result in some job applications, but that also resulted in some leads too. But I think that was more just indirect and luck, that someone looked at the picture and then kind of clicked through to our website, and off we went. So we put Facebook ads on hold for a couple of years because we didn't really feel like it was working for us, and we had our limited budget that we were directing into content marketing. We've started Facebook ads again recently, and our method is we've created 8 videos that talk about different elements of financial literacy or address a specific financial problem, like preparing for tax time or a cash flow challenge. Mm-hmm. And the call to action with those videos is to join the 5-day challenge. Mm-hmm. So we've been running that for a short amount of time. I don't feel like I've got enough data to know whether it's working well yet, but we're going to try the same strategy for the next or the upcoming 5-day challenge. So we're not putting a ton of money into it at the moment. We're really still pretty early with learning about Facebook ads and figuring out our audience and tweaking different things. But the intention is that once we figure it out, then I'd like to spend more money on it.
Yeah, and I think that's very wise to spend a little bit of money and test it first before, splashing out a huge amount of cash for an unknown. I'm assuming you'll be promoting those videos, and your video will have, as you said, that call to action at the end, but then you'll probably create a retargeting audience of the people who've watched the video and then show them an ad for that challenge. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. I can see that working. I don't see why not. Just make sure you put, time sensitive stuff in your ad. But anyway, we can probably talk offline about that. Cool. Okay. So let me think. Are there any other strategies that you found were successful in growing your business? Or generating traffic to your site and targeted traffic?
Well, we've talked about content marketing in the sense of bringing in customers and also just increasing or building relationships with people. I haven't really talked about it from an SEO point of view, and we weren't really thinking much about SEO in the first couple of years, but then we did kind of double down on that probably 12 months ago. And it's taken about 12 months to really see, I think our traffic doubled over a period of 12 months when we really focused on SEO and just tweaked a lot of things in the back end, and as well as being more intentional about the content that we were creating. So now we get, we track where our leads are coming from and the percentage of leads that are coming from SEO. It used to be 0 at the beginning. So it's someone that's found us via Google search. And now that percentage is gradually increasing as the weeks go on, which is great.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have some kind of targeted SEO strategy? I mean, I know a little bit about SEO. I usually say to people, I know enough to be dangerous. I'm certainly no SEO expert. So I'm just curious as to what kind of SEO strategy you took.
We spent a lot of time reworking our site structure. So we looked at what our objective, what is the goal of this? And it's to have increase traffic and then increase conversions. And then also we looked at the countries we were in, and there was some things we needed to do to just little things like having our addresses verified in the different countries that we operate in. So there were things like that. We spent a lot of time on our site structure, and then we redid our website. So we started with SEO and the site structure recommended, and then kind of built it up from there with copy and then design. And then we were more specific about the keywords we wanted to target.
Yeah. From memory, site structure is a huge component to SEO, and I usually direct people to, there's a really in-depth article by a guy called Bruce Clay. Have you heard of him?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
Check it out. So I can put a link in the show notes to this article. I've directed so many people to this article. But basically, Bruce sort of explains the ideal structure of your website as almost being like 80% of its ranking the way Google ranks sites, and it's got to be crawlable. So he uses the concept of different colored balls. So a bad website structure would be one where the different colored balls are in the same jar together. So, for example, you might have an inner page linking to a different part of your website. I'm probably butchering this explanation, but this is the theory, that you have silos on your site. So, for example, for my website, where I've got kind of 2 main parts to my business, I've got my agency and I've got my training stuff. So I would never link an article that's in the training silo to something that's talking about my agency, for example. And so it's very distinct branches of a tree where the branches don't cross over. But Bruce Clay explains it in a much more elegant manner than I have. But yeah, you should definitely check it out. And the times that I've done this to websites that I've owned, it's made a massive difference to SEO. Yeah,
I need to go and do some reading on that article. And it's funny, in my calendar, I have like in my Gmail account, I use Boomerang to send things back to myself. And I've got some training from reps that I've been wanting to do, but I've had other things I've needed to work on. So I've kept on boomeranging it. But this conversation is inspiring me to sit down and do that training.
Nice. Yeah, you definitely should. I'll put a link to this article in the show notes, and I'll also send it to you, Meryl. And it's really, really helpful, and he explains it in a very clear and concise manner. You think, of course. And it kind of makes sense how Google, it just basically makes your site really, really readable to Google, and Google loves that, is how I understand it. Obviously, there's a whole linking strategy to SEO, which I know nothing about, and I don't claim to know anything about, but really often for many kinds of local businesses that are not in a super competitive industry, often this is actually all you need to do, and you can rank really quite easily, which is pretty cool. Okay, so if you were starting out again, let's say, you did this 7-day startup by Dan Norris today, what's something that you would maybe do differently if you were starting now as opposed to when you started 4 years ago? Because I think internet years are like dog years. So 4 years is really a long time in the internet space, and things have changed. So what's something that you would do differently now?
Well, I think I would want to. I think I know more now about how to grow an email list, and we were really slow with that, even though we were trying. So I would still want to grow an email list, but I'd be putting more resources into that. And I think if I was to grow a business now, I'd have a bit more capital behind me, and so we could move faster. I did find that frustrating the first time around, putting $500 in and then having to wait to earn every dollar. It just meant that everything was so slow. So next time I'd put more money in up front so that we could actually...
I think you pay with money or with time.
Yeah, spot on. And so we were doing everything ourselves, but also kind of scrimping and saving on what software we were buying or everything. So next time I'd hire people much faster and also just invest in the infrastructure faster. But I suppose you can do that. Yeah, back then we didn't really have an option.
Yeah.
So in terms of strategies, I mean, there's lots of different digital marketing techniques that I would like to learn more about. And this might come back to a philosophy of mine where I think it's important to learn enough so that you can hire the right people, but you don't necessarily need to go into super detail. You just need to know that you're hiring the right people to help you, and then enough to keep them accountable or to guide them with what the vision is. And I apply that same theory to accounting. I teach a lot of financial literacy, and I think it's really important for every business owner to know that. But that doesn't mean they have to be doing it all themselves. They can be, if they know enough, then they can hire the right people to help them. And so that would be my philosophy if I was starting a business again, would be to be really clear about what the vision is and our target market. I mean, again, we'd probably adapt and iterate if we grew. And then I'd be hiring much earlier the right digital marketing experts to come in and help with whatever strategy we're going to use. And that would probably depend on the industry and the audience that I was going after in terms of what kind of tactics we would use.
Yeah. What would you say would be the first thing that you would hire someone to do in the digital marketing space? What's been moved the needle the most for you?
Well, writing content is a huge time suck, so it just takes so long. But let me think about how I build teams. So when I was starting out, I would build a team by hiring someone junior to take a little bit off my plate. But my hiring philosophy now is to hire someone really experienced who can build a team around them. So if I was hiring someone here, I'd probably engage a strategist first who's really experienced to help set the strategy, but probably pay a consultant to do that. And then I'd want to hire someone that's good at project management who can juggle the different contractors that we would use across the different specialists that we would use. But I think it's important in-house to have someone that's good at project management with a marketing mindset. Because my mistake in trying to hire a full-time marketing person in-house is you can't expect them to be an SEO specialist, PPC, copywriting, design. You can't expect that all in one person. Mm-hmm. So I think it's more important if you're a small business to have someone that's got broad skills and is good at project management to get other people to do that work. And they might even not be the strategist because you might not be able to expect them to have that skill set.
Yeah, interesting. It's hard, isn't it? So going forward, what are you going to be focusing on to grow your business? Like what traffic generating strategy?
So I see the financial literacy course that I'm working on as it's a revenue stream and it's a way of diversifying the business. But I also see it as a lead generator. And we've seen that of the two courses that I've already run, where we teach a lot of skills around how to do bookkeeping and how to interpret financial reports. But then once we've taught it, then someone knows best practice and realizes it's time consuming or needs expertise. And so then says, B Ninjas, can you look after this for me? So I'll be focused on making sure that the content is really great and that everyone going through the course is getting a really good experience and getting results. And then a step back from that is looking at how do we scale the sales behind selling the course that then leads into our recurring or done for you service. And ideally, I'm hoping that we can find a paid traffic model that works. We're still experimenting with that, because once we figure that out, assuming we do, then we can put more money behind that. And digital courses are a more scalable model, so we won't have the service delivery challenges that we've had previously in trying to scale a done for you service.
Yep, that makes total sense. Yeah, I guess if you can find a way that your ads can pay for themselves, then you can grow and scale at a much faster rate. So I find so many business owners, they're so focused on their ads returning a certain amount of profit, where they probably don't realize that actually if they can make their money back so they're not losing money, there are such additional benefits to that. You know, you're growing a customer base. Like for example, like I'd personally any day of the week take buying 10,000 customers and breaking even versus buying 100 customers and making a huge profit on it, because 10,000 customers, even though I've broken even and I haven't actually made money, I've got suddenly this huge customer base, I've got a referral network, I've got a database and all this kind of stuff. The opportunities to grow my business beyond that are so great compared to, you know, the short-term aspect of 100 customers that I bought profitably. Does that make sense?
It does, and I would choose the same option as you. And I think something to think about there is the customer lifetime value, because this particular product that they've bought through the ad might break even. But if you can work out what your customer lifetime value is, which is much easier with a subscription model or recurring billing type business, if you know they stay with you on average for a year, then it really makes sense to invest in that. Or they might buy different products. And so getting clear around what your customer lifetime value is, I think would be helpful in knowing, well, how much is it okay to spend on acquiring that customer?
True. I think the risk with the lifetime value as the main metric that you're going by is that you might hit cash flow issues, and I guess no one would know that better than you, being the accountant, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not a big fan of managing ad accounts to a lifetime value because of that because of that cash flow issue. You know, once again, it depends how long the customer is. Like if you've got to wait 5 years to get that full lifetime customer value, that's a problem, as opposed to 3 months. Maybe it's not, you know. But yeah, I guess that's sort of the grey area, and it depends on different business models and different businesses how aggressive you want to be in growing your business.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a number of things to look at. I normally give that explanation if someone's resistant to spending any money to acquire a customer, or they don't want to, then having that conversation about, well, how much are you expecting this customer to spend with you, can then change their perspective on not wanting to spend anything. But yeah, there's a number of factors to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Meryl, for coming on today's show and sharing your strategies that you've managed to grow your awesome business. Where can people find out a bit more information about you and what you do?
Bean Ninjas, which is BEAN ninjas.com, that's where we post a lot of our content. And I'm also quite active on LinkedIn, and that's just my full name, which is Meryl Johnston, and I can provide a link to that as well, and happy to connect with anyone that's interested over on LinkedIn too.
Awesome. Too easy. We will make some resources available in these show notes on today's episode. So you can head on over to teachtraffic.com and find it there. Thank you so much, Meryl, for coming on today's episode. It's been a real pleasure of mine to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Teach Traffic podcast. For more information on each of these episodes and handy PDFs that you can download, head on over to teachtraffic.com.